Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, and Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner of Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights. Welcome to the show, Cliff. How's your day going this week? Can I tell everybody that's your birthday week this week?
You can. By the time anyone's hearing this, it will have passed, but that's okay. Excited to be getting older.
Yes. Yeah. Always that challenge, you're like, do I celebrate? Is it just another day? I don't know. I was the kind of kid who I loved my birthday. I still do. No matter how old I get, I'm a person who definitely takes that whole week and tries to sort of extend my celebration out. So hopefully you're able to do a little bit of that.
Yeah. I got to celebrate it the best way people in our industry can by having an entire analyst day with UKG. One of the things we talk about.
That's right. It's always good to be able to get that. I know we were supposed to be on site with UKG this week, but unfortunately I had a family emergency that kept me home. So we got to do it virtually, which was nice. And so we'll get some updates from that this week. But there's a lot of other things going on this week. It's been a news-packed couple of weeks. What else are we going to be covering today, Cliff?
Yeah, I mean, we're just really picking the highlights here. But one of the topics we're going to talk about is the HireVue acquisition of Modern Hire. We'll talk about the updates to Ceridian Dayforce. We'll talk about updates to Vizier's platform. We'll talk about updates to SAP and their integration of Microsoft AI. We will even talk about AI in general. One of the things that happened yesterday as of this recording is that Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, testified in front of Congress because you as a listener, you're interested in this stuff. The whole world's interested in this stuff. And it has become a hot topic and we love to talk about it.
It's really something I think that every time I turn around, I get another question about it. And it feels like it's everybody feels like they're behind on it. Like there's the FOMO going on around it. That's kind of crazy. But in all reality, we've been doing AI and machine learning for several years now. I do realize that we've got some changes that have taken place because of the breakthroughs they made in generative AI. But it is sort of interesting to see the sort of rapid uptick in it. When my dad, who is 79 plus years old, asked me about generative AI, I know it's really hit mainstream at this point because he was listening to the TV news talk about it. So...
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the test we used to always say about topics. Like if my grandmother asked me about it, then I know that it's out there.
Yep. Well, why don't we start with UKG? Because we had a full day yesterday. Both you and I sat in on various segments of it to sort of hear. They did their annual analyst. So UKG does two big sort of events each year for analysts to give them updates. Usually in the spring, they do what we call the Analyst Summit update. And that is just an analyst event where they kind of bring us all in, give us a heads up on what's happening in the market. A lot of stuff's under NDA, but not all of it. I know they did a big amount of sort of social still on it. And so hopefully we'll be able to add to that with the podcast today. Mm-hmm. But we also have the fall event, that aligns with their customer event, which we were both at last year. And that definitely does. Also, there's a lot of updates at that event. So usually you get two sort of big areas, big time frames, I guess I would say, where we get UKG updates. Cliff, this one was a full day. They literally stopped for I think 1 hour for lunch. And then there was like 2 10-minute breaks. That was all they had during that day. It was a pretty full packed day. What did you think were sort of the biggest highlights you heard from yesterday?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned that AI has been around for a while, and that's something they've really wanted to iterate, that although they are making use of generative AI, they have had AI in their products, and they wanted to talk about that. And one of the things that I really like that they do, and they did it again yesterday, is that they put that ethics conversation front and center. They highlighted their responsible use of data, to have human offline reviews, sort of reinforcement, product audits, to really look at, the bias and whether the quality of the AI is meeting the needs. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I thought that the kind of continued and complete integration of Great Place to Work, rather than being sort of a standalone product, but being fully integrated within all of UKG's suite, was pretty interesting to me. I know you and I had been talking in the green room beforehand about, their sort of very direct delineation between Ready and Pro, if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I know that's something that you were kind of a part of that conversation, right? About where they needed to draw that line.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good, it's interesting. And UKG is probably one of the better vendors at this. They very clearly point out like the things that we tell them in the fall, how they've sort of changed their thinking in the spring. And that was one of the things I think, our data was very clear that UKG Ready, their sort of what they would consider their SMB product, was being used by organizations bigger than 100 employees, which I think the original breakout was 100 or 200, they had said last year. They were going to sort of make that the focus area for it. And our data, and I think others were proponent of it, that, hey, look, you guys have a lot of customers who are in that 500 employee range, right? And they went back and looked at their numbers. And when they looked at direct sales versus not, their non-direct sales, which are their channel partners, the direct sales were clearly a higher percentage were sitting at that 500 employee range, right? And so, yeah, that I think was a big sort of focus at the end of the presentation yesterday. And what I really liked was when they start talking about the numbers, you're talking 40,000 plus customers who are on that product alone, right? I know small businesses, just there's a lot of them and they do a lot of changeover, but it was good to hear them really talking about the investments they're making in UKG Ready. But then they were very clear that the UKG Pro product is going to be growing in what it's offering, its complexity, its sophistication for the upmarket. And what used to be Dimension's workforce management system is now sort of embedded all the way through. So you basically just got the single message of UKG Pro, which is a really solid. I think one of the things that UKG has done really well in this conversation is clearly delineating their products and who those products are focused on. And that's hard to do as quickly as they've done it with this merger and acquisition. We know many, many vendors who've taken years to sort of consolidate messaging and consolidate product areas. And I think UKG has done that very, very well. The other thing I think that I was excited to see was that, they were really talking not just product, which has always been a big focus for UKG, but they were talking a lot about growth. And, they saw double-digit growth from last year, which was good to see. From a revenue growth perspective, they're heading towards that $5 billion goal that they've been talking about. They talked about their partnerships with the SIs and how those were helping them through their growth. And that was really good. They particularly mentioned and called out Accenture and a couple other partners who had been really helping them sort of build that next level of, I think, capabilities. They also mentioned quite a bit that they're focusing a bit more on global. So we will see more announcements about global, including the exact words where we're dipping a toe into global payroll. There was a lot of other sort of things hinted around where they were heading that, but I think we'll hear more about that in the fall, right?
Yeah, that's the true essence of spilling the tea. We can't say too much because they couldn't say too much either. But that's definitely one to keep your eye out. I also liked an analogy that was made with the 3-layer cake, which they may not go forward with, but kind of this combining of sort of different forms, functions. I don't know how you think of that, expressions of AI within their products. You had summarized it pretty nicely too, but I think that this idea of sort of, one that's more sort of back of house, you have your end user sort of component of it.
Yeah. So if I understood, I know it's a little bit hard. I mean, I like the layer cake analogy used for artificial intelligence. So that was, I think, a really good message that they had put out there. It was the idea that you can kind of take the investment they're making in generative AI and artificial intelligence in general. And they were very clear to say, look, we're not going to jump right into what's going on with OpenAI and ChatGPT, and they highlighted, as you noted, all the dangers there. Mm-hmm. But they said they were firmly working closely with Google on their generative AI breakthroughs that they've been doing. And with that, they were setting up through their Flex environment, which is sort of the underlying data architecture that they have across the UKG platforms now, that single data model. They're also creating basically a layered cake approach to the artificial intelligence. So basically, you might be doing artificial intelligence that's basically being trained on and working on everything across the entire UKG platform through that Flex data model, right? And then you might be only using a data set that's specific to a module area like a workforce management and schedules. And that data and that data module doesn't really need to be available in all areas, but it definitely needs to be available across organizations who are using that sort of scheduling capability. And then there's a layer that's just specific to your organization. And that is training and data and information that so you're still using artificial intelligence, but the algorithms are only running on data that's within your organization. That data stays within your organization. And that's how they're kind of, at least the explanation as I understood it. And that's a very, I would say, simplified version of what is a very complex technology approach, because you have to know basically where your information is, where your artificial intelligence modules are, sort of where you're going to get the data, where that feedback from the module, from the artificial intelligence model, model is feeding to. Once you sort of take the action, there's data that comes out of it generally. Where's that data feeding to from a feedback loop? What training data is it going back into? And then ultimately, how does it reincorporate itself back into the artificial intelligence model? And that's kind of, I think, where that all goes together. I think that they did a really good job of sort of clarifying that they're going to try and keep this as simple as possible for their buyers, but also very, very focused on the security that needs to be in place around it. So that would be my take from that.
Yeah. And one last thing before we move on, and it's kind of a smaller one, but one that I found interesting was their acquisition of Toast, sort of a service and hospitality point of sale software. That's so interesting to me because that is a vertical that can really benefit from some of these advanced capabilities, right? Of taking some of this AI and use it for strategic workforce planning, for scheduling.
I want to make just a comment there, Cliff. Yeah. I don't think it's an acquisition. I think the acquisition, they did a partnership with Toast, which is the point of sale. The acquisition I think you're talking about is of Corbett.
Thank you. Yes, but I was thinking of Toast in terms of how it could be applied. Yeah, good point. And that is so cool because it allows these smaller businesses to take advantage of these next gen AI capabilities in scheduling and in planning and in resource allocation and skills management in a way that used to be only the purview of kind of larger, more, I don't want to say more complex, but, areas and industries you'd think of it before. And it could really be used very well in these type of ways. So.
Yeah. So if I understood what was happening there, so they basically had outlined a couple of areas where they had deep partnerships where they were passing data back and forth, and Toast was one of the many, along with Google and Salesforce, a couple other areas, right? Where they
Teams
were passing,
and Slack as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And Slack. Yeah. Where they were passing data back and forth. And to that point, you can't do really, especially if you're doing a focus on retail and hourly workforces, right? You really need to be inside their operation systems and embedded inside their operation systems for their workers to get the most out of the HR applications. And that, I think, was the biggest highlight of what you were talking about. The other thing that they were very clear about, and so I think, and again, if you're looking at sort of the top three messages, we heard very clearly we're growing. We heard very clearly we're focusing quite a bit on global. And we heard very clearly, and this one was the one which I think Chris Todd did a masterful job of sort of articulating, was we are definitely focused on hourly and workforces, right? And that, I think, was something that we had not heard them explicitly say that they were driving, that they were building an environment that's going to be very relevant for basically the workforce that oftentimes gets left behind, the frontline worker in a lot of organizations, the retail, the hospitality, the frontline employee in almost all areas, right? That was very clearly where they said they were going to be spending sort of the bulk of their energy. They would still have solutions that would meet the needs of sort of, the white collared office worker. But they said, most of the time, many of these products that come out, and I would have to agree with this in many cases, a lot of the products that come out of sort of HR technology in general, oftentimes are built out of sort of office environment thinking and strategizing, right? Having something that is specifically focused on hourly, non-exempt workers, that I think is really powerful. Does that shift your thinking a little bit about what their capabilities might be in the future as well, Cliff? Because you've worked in those kind of environments.
I have, and I love to see it, of course, and that's great. It does. It really is very interesting and very cool, but it also, it changes a little bit of the brand in a very positive way, I think, for UKG. And that they are kind of being this, hey, great things for everyone, right? It's that great place to work mentality. It's brought not just capabilities, but almost part of that philosophy to bear for them. And that's really neat.
And they did a great job with updates. There's a lot more. We'll probably put out a little bit of an update ourselves on LinkedIn around this. But I just think that they did a really good job this week of sort of clarifying where they're heading. A lot of good product updates. And more importantly, I think they really, clarified a lot of messages around who they are, what their focus is, and what their goal is, and how they're going to get there. So, and you don't always get that at these events. A lot of times it can be a little bit all over the place, right? So it's easy to get all over the place. Let me just jump off one area, I think, on this conversation we had about the payroll, because I do think if anybody's listening and they're sort of thinking about what they're where they should be, sort of thinking about from an HR technology perspective. We know from our data that more than 50% of the market is saying that they are planning to sort of look at and or replace their payroll system in the next 12 to 24 months, which means we're already into that first year of those conversations. Not only have we heard this week from UKG talking about sort of dipping their toe in the payroll, we definitely heard some updates from Workday and on their relationship with the Alight conversation and where they're sort of investing heavily in making sure they can continue to do even more expansions into global payroll through that relationship, as well as we heard from Oracle last week talking about how they were expanding their global payroll modules. So we're kind of seeing this distinct pattern come out in the market where we're seeing organizations are either really doing really tight partnerships, they're acquiring organizations to sort of help them build out their global payroll, or they're building out their own global payroll capabilities internally. And I do think we're going to see a bit of a battle over the next year in the payroll space.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, if I can segue from, as you mentioned, acquiring, one of the other news stories was an acquisition. To give a little bit of time for some of these other big stories we've got, HireVue acquired Modern Hire, which was pretty interesting to me, because at first this seemed, like almost too similar of companies. But as you start to think more about it and dive into the capabilities, what it sort of finishes off is making a sort of end-to-end hiring experience that is all with innovative and modern technology, from both the assessment and the interviewing place, as part of the hiring, which I found pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I this was a big one for me, and we know there was a lot of commentary on it on LinkedIn this week as HireVue made the announcement. I think everyone was very pleased about this acquisition. Just for those who maybe don't know some of the history, Modern Hire was sort of a conglomeration of what used to be Montage, which is sort of video interviewing, but then another small company called Shaker International. And I knew Shaker International fairly well because they were out of the Cleveland area, which is my original hometown back in the day where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And they were probably one of the absolute best organizations at doing what we called this sort of scenario or virtual assessments of work environments, right? And they did some of them, they had some of the deepest approaches to ensuring that they had validated and very effective assessments for sort of various work environments that had large populations, right? Big employee bases. And they were acquired or merged with what was Montage back then, and they added more assessments to the module. And now they were picked up by HireVue. And so this, I think, where HireVue has done very focused on video interviewing, and they got into a little bit of hot water in 2019, 2022 over sort of the video interviewing analysis that was going on at that time. It was one of the big artificial intelligence conversations that was happening in the market. They discontinued that product about a year and a half ago, and are continuing to obviously do all the other investments they made. HireVue was one of the first entries into this market and really continued to push the envelope. I think adding this assessment and adding the organizations who I think have some of the highest levels of validation that I've ever seen in the market around their assessment products and tools is really going to add value to where HireVue is at right now.
Yeah, and a lot of the language that HireVue used, you could really see that they were loving the idea of not just the sort of markets, but also the people and tech that they're acquiring. So, I think that really shows a focus on innovation and a future-focused mindset, which is definitely good to see. I don't know if that's a perfect segue, but I thought that might be a good one to get into then. Another news story that came out is that SAP is going to lean on Microsoft's AI Copilot for hiring and upskilling. So a little bit about that. SAP says that, this will enhance their SuccessFactors suite to use LLM, the large language models, to help organizations with the recruiting process, both in attraction and upskilling. So that kind of fits into an ongoing trend, right? We saw a few of the ones in our space, but also, some of the ones that were mentioned even in that article where that Informatica is using Clear GPT. Salesforce has the partnership with Slack and Tableau's GPT. So a lot in using these sort of generative AI models, right? And these open AI created models, along with, of course, Google's and Microsoft's sort of true full AIs that are out there. Just kind of finding everyone's doing it, right? But I think it's become necessary to do for being a helpful recommendation engine of turning these insights into actions. And I think that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically going to become pick your horse, right? Just like it was for a while. Where are you gonna bet, and will more than one sort of become sort of the, a viable option across the market? I can remember when I was first making decisions about how I was going to update my house to automate certain things, right? And it was either pick Google or pick Alexa. And, I did Alexa a lot of, I have all little Alexa bots all over my house. I will have to say I've recently started to move back to Google because it seems like there's more capabilities with Google. So picking your horse is a tough thing because you never know if you're going to pick the right one, right?
Also, I don't think you're supposed to use the A word. You just turned on like 20 people or
I'm sorry, everyone. Really sorry. Really, really sorry. Yes. Yeah. So I do think that, we're going to end up in this environment where there will be some leaders and there will be some people who are going to fall by the wayside as they're doing this, right?
Yeah. And on that sort of AI train, Ceridian had a number of updates to their Dayforce product. And a lot of it had to do with how AI is used. They have a career explorer that will be AI backed to help with self-service career pathing, to help link up what you might have as an employee with skills to what is available within your organization. They have their burnout dashboard, people analytics burnout dashboard, which again uses some of this tech to identify teams and employees at risk of burnout. Always a topic. It's something we're seeing a lot during the pandemic years and people aren't talking about as much, but I think is still important. And that will be new visualization on the people analytics dashboards. And one thing that actually sort of ties back to the UKG conversation is the Dayforce Integration Studio, which is helping with creating these connections within an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
We actually did see that as well from UKG, where they had their developer hub, which, helps organizations with again, make those connections between any of the solutions and any of the applications that exist within their ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, including open access to the APIs and the developer APIs. So,
and I know we gotta wrap things up, Cliff, because we're at our 30-minute mark, and all of us are jumping for things. But I think that the thing we're seeing is that many of these vendors are starting to fill out these applications in a lot of different ways, right? Putting together development hubs, putting together AI connections, building out, interfaces. We're kind of past the point of doing big modules in a lot of cases. These are all the things to make these solutions maybe work better inside of organizations. But I think one of the last things we should maybe talk about is what's going on in DC as it relates to this, right? That's perfect. So Sam Altman, who's the head of the OpenAI, who developed, as you said, one of the front running horses, if not the absolute leader of that, he himself had a great quote. I'm just going to go ahead and read it verbatim. This was in response to Senator Cory Booker. He says, Sam Altman, while testifying in front of Congress about sort of both the possibilities and the dangers of AI, said, it is absolutely true that the number of companies that can train the true frontier models is going to be small just because of the resource required. And so I think there needs to be incredible scrutiny on us and our competitors. Something you don't hear a lot of these tech giants going up and regulations, asking for scrutiny. Yes.
Look, I want oversight on this. I love to hear it. And it's like, I'm guessing that he's probably a fan of this podcast and listens, because this is what we talk about, that there needs to be oversight on all these things. There's so many cool possibilities, and there's so many different ways and applications, but it is not a replacement for what we humans can do. It's just an enhancement, but it can get out of hand because, there will always be a tendency to lean on these recommendations without truly understanding them. But, that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, it's all good things. Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about Vizier. Vizier had some updates this week and a conference last week. So we'll try and throw that into next week as well. And there was a couple of really good things talking about the unionization movement around the technology space and tech workers. And I think we'll save that for next week's conversation as well. I think those are all topics that are critical to what's going on in the market right now, and everyone should be paying attention to them. So, but I apologize, guys. We are at our 30-minute mark, so we got to wrap things up today. So let me just quickly do our reminder that if you're interested in any of the research that we talked about on our end today, you're more than likely to go to our website at sapientinsights.com and download our full annual HR system survey report, as well as our keynote session and information. If you have any questions or are interested in having some help with your own HR strategy journey, just drop us a line at info@sapientinsights.com or sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates about where Cliff and I will be at and what we're speaking about and what research is being dropped each week. Cliff, just a quick thank you to you as well for putting all of this together as usual, to our production team, Brand Method Media Group, run by Kelly, our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton. And most importantly, thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. You guys, we hope that we're sort of capturing all the information and making sure that you guys get the most relevant and up-to-date information as quickly as possible. That's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. If you are inclined to help us out a bit, please subscribe and download from wherever you get your podcast. Help us with some likes. That always is a good thing to make sure that we are continuing to expand the people who are listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as well, if you want to hear more from myself or Cliff, be sure to follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of HR tech updates and insights and all the hottest tea for all the things that you're looking for. Thanks, everyone. Bye.